Haven Arrest Missionary Baptist Church Sunday School Lesson number 2, Sunday, June 11, 2017. The lesson is entitled Gideon's Call. The lesson comes from Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 18. We were asked to read Judges 6, verses 1 through chapter 8, verse 35. The place is Ophrah. The time is 1191 BC. This lesson on the call of God shows very clearly that God empowers the person he calls. One does not need a certain basic skill set, education, or physical or mental strength to be called by God to a task. God is prepared to supply the plan and the means needed to accomplish what he wants done. If God has called you to teach a Sunday school class, please do not complain to him or anyone else that you are not qualified. Of course you are not qualified. No one is qualified. You must realize that God is with you and move forward relying on him. He is about to do something and have you the privilege to be used by him. God is going to teach the class through you as you walk with him. Today's aim. Facts. To observe the basic ingredients of the need, the call, and God's provision for the task. Principle. To understand that God does not require the one receiving his call to be qualified for the task. Application. To learn to be open to the call of God without evocating about one's qualifications. Illustrating the lesson. We should always be open to God's call and willing to accept it without delay. Practical points. 1. God will reveal himself to us in the midst of hardship. Judges 6, 11 through 12. 2. Even when it seems that God has forsaken us, he has a plan for deliverance. Verses 13 through 14. 3. When we are sent by God, we can go with confidence. 4. God's will is not limited by our financial status or social class. Verse 15. 5. God will reassure us that he is with us. Verses 16 through 17. 6. God is long-suffering and will allow us to prepare for duty in his service. Golden text. The angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Judges 6:12. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is a visit by the angel of the Lord, Judges 6:11 through 12. The second is an answer to doubts, Judges 6:13 through 14. The third is the persistence of doubts, Judges 6:15 through 18. Introduction. In his 1998 book, The Greatest Generation, Random House, Tom Brokaw gave a series of portraits of ordinary Americans who grew up during the Great Depression and answered their nation's call to serve in World War II. Whether in uniform or in support services, they accomplished extraordinary deeds and became, in the author's estimation, the greatest generation any society has ever produced. Whether or not we agree with Brokaw's thesis, we must admit that ordinary people can become unlikely heroes when thrust into extraordinary situations. They do not think of themselves as heroes, but their heroic deeds have an impact that may outlast them by years or even generations. The Bible is filled with unlikely heroes for the simple reason that God chooses to use those who grasp his strength by faith and bring glory to them. Glory to him, not themselves. 1 Corinthians 1:26 through 31. The book of Judges has its share of unlikely heroes, and none is more unlikely than Gideon. Yet, as this lesson reveals, the Lord called him to great exploits of faith. A visit by the angel of the Lord, Judges 6:11. And there came an angel of the Lord and sat under an oak, which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abizarite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Verse 12. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. The angel's appearance, Judges 6:11. Israel was in a deplorable condition in Gideon's day. A 40-year period of peace following God's deliverance through Deborah and Barak, chapter 5, verse 31, came to an end with the invasion of the Midianites. Israel had again departed from the Lord, and this was his disciplinary judgment, chapter 6, verse 1. For 7 years, Midian and its allies repeatedly raided the land, leaving the Israelites in almost subhuman conditions, verses 2 through 6. When the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, he sent them an unnamed prophet to remind them of the root of their problem. In spite of all God's good deeds for them, they had spurned him for foreign gods, verses 7 through 10. This rebuke was intended to turn their hearts back to God and give him a moral basis for delivering them. At the same time, the Lord also was preparing the instrument he would use as a deliverer, Gideon from the tribe of Manasseh. This began when there came an angel of the Lord and sat under an oak, which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abizarite, Judges 6:11. Though the location of Ophrah is uncertain, we know it was in the tribe of Manasseh's territory, for Abizar was a descendant of Manasseh. Joshua 17 to Judges 6:15. Joash may have been prominent in this town. An angel in Judges 6:11 is literally the angel. This meant this angel was not a typical heavenly messenger, but an appearance of the Lord, Yahweh himself in human form. Apparently, Gideon did not realize this at first, as indicated in his addressing the angel Adonai, the Lord, in verses 13 and 15, or master. However, he eventually recognized the angel's true identity and called him Yahweh, God and Lord, in verse 22. The narrator also called him Yahweh, verses 14 and 16. By the oak, the Lord spoke to Gideon, Joash's son, who was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress in order to keep it hidden from the Midianites. Grain was normally threshed in an open area. Oxen or donkeys were used to trample the stalks and pull a sled to separate the grain from the husk or chaff. When the farmer threw the mixture into the air with a winnowing fork, the grain fell to the ground and the wind blew the chaff away. But the Midianites' raids had precluded this practice in the open. So Gideon was threshing in a wine press in a more concealed area. He was beating the grain with a stick in a place totally unsuitable for threshing. The angel's greeting, Judges 6:12. The divine angel addressed Gideon in a most unusual way. The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. This title could refer either to a courageous soldier or a person of prominence and wealth in the community. Joshua 10:7, Ruth 2:1. Gideon did come from a prominent family. He had 10 servants, Judges 6:27. But it is more likely the Lord was speaking in anticipation of his military leadership. In view of Gideon's present situation, this greeting seems like mockery. If he was a man of valor, where was his courage? Why was he hiding from the Midianites? But it was not mockery. God was preparing him for a great work, and he wanted him to glimpse what God's presence could do for him. The Lord knew what kind of man Gideon was, weak and fearful, but he also saw what he would be when his faith was strengthened. This should encourage us as well. and answer to doubts. Verse 13. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us unto the hands of the Midianites. Verse 14. And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? Gideon's question, Judges 6:13. Gideon's response reveals that he not only did not recognize who the messenger was, but also missed the singular thee, you, in his promise, verse 12. Gideon assumed the angel was speaking of the Lord's presence with all Israel. If the Lord was really with them, he wanted to know why had all this misery happened to them. He apparently had not heard the explanation already given by the prophet, verses 7 through 10. Gideon was a thinker, and he had already pondered the theological problems implied by Israel's plight. He knew his nation's history and asked what had become of all the Lord's miracles their fathers had told them about. The Lord had delivered them in Egypt, in the desert, and in Canaan, but that was all in the past. Where was God now? Gideon did not question his power, he questioned his presence. God was strong and Israel was weak. To Gideon, that meant the Lord had forsaken them. Gideon was perplexed and perhaps a little cynical at this discrepancy. He reasoned that if Israel was the Lord's people, he ought to continue to bless them. But he was only partially correct. It was true the Lord had delivered Israel over to Midian, but he had not abandoned them. They had abandoned him. In fact, God's disciplinary judgment proved that he still cared for them. The role of Israel's sin in all this somehow escaped Gideon. He had been brought up in an atmosphere of spiritual compromise, Judges 6:25. Again, had not cultivated a sensitivity to the Lord's holiness and revealed will. He was probably ignorant of the warnings God had given through Moses. Leviticus 26:14 through 39, Deuteronomy 28:15 through 48. Gideon was no different from other sinful human beings. It is natural to ignore God in times of prosperity and attribute success to our own efforts. But when hardships come, how easy is it to blame God for them? In times of adversity, our first inclination ought to be to question ourselves, not God. Hardship is not always the result of sin, but self-examination in the light of God's word is always a good place to begin. The Lord's Commission, Judges 6:14. With the words, "And the Lord looked upon him," the writer of Judges affirmed that the angel of the Lord was Yahweh himself. He looked Gideon in the eye as he gave an answer, yet he did not answer Gideon's question of why he had withdrawn his power from Israel. Instead, he challenged Gideon to do something about the situation. Too often we spend our time whining to God about our evil surroundings, feeling victimized by them. But when we ask him why he does not change them, we may be overlooking the obvious, that God wants us to be a part of his solution to the problem. Are we willing to make ourselves available for his use? The Lord commanded, "Go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee?" Judges 6:14. This thy might refers to the strength the Lord was now giving Gideon, not only innate strength of his own. In essence, God was saying, you wonder where my miracles are? Well, I'm still working miracles, and you will see them through the power I am making available to you. God's power would enable Gideon to save Israel from the Midianites. The reminder that it was the Lord who was sending him provided Gideon the assurance that God's presence was with him in this undertaking. It is worth noting that the Lord did not take time to answer all of Gideon's theological questions. He did not even completely identify himself. He merely commanded Gideon, promised him strength, and asked for his trust. John 6:13, 1 John 5:4 through 5. The presence of doubts. Verse 15. And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. Verse 16. And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. Verse 17. And he said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. Verse 18. Depart not hence, I pray thee, until I come unto thee, and bring forth my present, and set it before thee. And he said, I will tarry until thou come again. Gideon's objection, Judges 6:15. Although impressed with his visitor, Gideon was not yet ready to accept his commission. Oh my Lord may indicate an awakening realization of who the angel was, but Gideon shrank from the task. He no longer doubted that the Lord would deliver Israel, but he doubted his adequacy to lead such a huge undertaking. Wherewith shall I save Israel? He asked. He could not imagine himself in this role. First, who would follow him? Gideon claimed to be from a poor family in Manasseh. This does not speak so much of poverty as of lack of status. Apparently, his clan was not known for leadership, so who would follow him? Furthermore, he was the least in his father's household. He was likely the youngest son. In any case, he lacked influence. Gideon was not unique in such objections to service. Moses had earlier argued that he was a nobody and that the Israelites would not follow him. Exodus 3:11, 13, 4, 1, and 10. Saul later claimed ineligibility because of his humble social status. 1 Samuel 9:21. And Jeremiah pleaded youth and ability to speak. Jeremiah 1:6. Countless saints over the centuries have professed their inadequacy for their divinely given task and shrunk from their calls. Such self-effacement is carried to an extreme can lead to total ineffectiveness. But if coupled with dependence on God, it can be the first step to useful ministry, for it gives him the opportunity to display his power without first removing the obstacle of pride and self-sufficiency. The Lord's promise, Judges 6:16. God did not rebuke Gideon for his objection. Instead, he nurtured his weak faith with a promise. He said, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. Previously, the Lord had assured Gideon that he was sending him. Now he promised to accompany Gideon on his mission. And where the presence of the Lord is, his power is also. Thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man carries a double condemnation. First, it speaks of the ease of Gideon's victory. The hordes of invaders would fall as easily as if Israel were fighting one person. Moses had earlier used this expression to describe the Lord's threat to smite all the disobedient Israelites with pestilence. Numbers 14:12. Moses had objected that if the Lord killed all these people as one man, verse 15, the surrounding nations would degenerate the Lord's power, verse 16. Second connotation of the expression is that the victory would be accomplished all at one time, just as one man would fall when defeated. Gideon would need only to deliver one blow to drive the Midianites out. Gideon surely knew how impossible the odds were against this happening. The Midianites' numbers were staggering. They came as grasshoppers for multitude, for both they and their camels were without number. Judges 6:5. At the time Gideon engaged them in battle, they were as the sand by the seaside for multitude. 7:12. They actually numbered 135,000. Chapter 8, verse 10. The kind of victory the Lord described could be achieved only by divine power. His request for additional proof. Judges 6:17 through 18. By this time, Gideon was sure that he had been given a divine message, but he still wanted confirmation that the angel was the Lord himself. He said, "Show me a sign that thou talkest with me. If now I have found grace in thy sight," shows that he realized he was imposing on the goodwill of his guest. Gideon asked that the visitor remain until he brought him a present and set it before him. Just what he expected to happen at that point was unclear, but he surely wanted the angel to signify in some way that he was accepting his gift. Since the term present can refer to a mere gift, this can be taken as a simple act of hospitality. However, the word is also used of tribute paid to a king or superior. Judges 3:15, 1 Kings 4:21, as well as to certain types of offerings to God. It is used of the offerings of Cain and Abel, Genesis 4:3 through 4, and of the meat or grain offerings prescribed in Israel's sacrificial system. Leviticus 2:1 through 16, 6:14 through 23. It thus seems unclear that Gideon intended it as a religious offering to confirm the identity of the recipient. As it turned out, the offering was generous indeed and took considerable time to prepare. It consisted of an entire kid, unleavened cakes made from an ephah, half a bushel of flour, and the broth from the meat. Judges 6:19. In a time of scarcity, it must have taken considerable sacrifice to present such a gift. Our lesson text ends at Judges 6:18 with the Lord's promise to remain until Gideon had returned with his offering. This in itself must be encouraged Gideon, but what happened immediately afterward fixed indelibly in his mind that he had been visited and commissioned by the Lord. The incarceration of the offering initially terrified him, and he fully expected to die in God's presence, verses 21 through 22. But the Lord's encouragement calmed his fears, and he declared the spot a place of peace, verse 23 through 24. When we ponder how the Lord patiently nurtured Gideon's faith, we can be encouraged to nurture ourselves on the promise of his word. Not all his works of power are in the past. In ways both great and small, he still displays himself through those who believe and live by his promises. Questions. 1. Describe Israel's condition in Gideon's day. What caused it? 2. Who was Gideon? What was he doing when the angel of the Lord appeared to him? 3. How did the angel address Gideon? Why did this seem like mockery? 4. What discrepancy did Gideon see between God's past deeds and Israel's present situation? 5. Whom do humans tend to blame when adversity strikes? 6. How did the angel of the Lord respond to Gideon's question? 7. What objection did Gideon express to the Lord's call? 8. How can the Lord use our self-deprecation to advantage in glorifying himself? 9. How did the Lord describe the victory he would give Gideon? 10. How was Gideon convinced it was really the Lord who spoke to him? This concludes the lesson for Sunday, June 11th, 2017. Thank you for listening. God bless.